what do you see are the most like problematic myths out there that are actually causing problems for people's health?
There's a lot of them. I don't know if you consider any of them to be more problematic than the other, but there's just so much information on the internet now, and so many people making claims that just aren't justifiable or supported by the evidence. I think one of the biggest challenges now is that a lot of it becomes a distraction. People start what I call the shiny object syndrome. They start thinking that whatever their favorite influencer is talking about is a game changer, and this is true of a lot of intelligent influencers also. Unfortunately, you can't base your evidence on the individual's academic credentials because a lot of people are practicing outside of their domain specific expertise. And to their credit, some of the more popular influencers have evolved over time. They've made claims historically that they've since changed their mind on as they've become more exposed to professionals or domain specific experts on a bunch of different topics. Kind of rambling because it's hard to put my finger on a specific problem. I just say that generally speaking, people are looking for something meaningful, maybe a hack. I hate that word. Something to get them the results that they want quicker or easier. And unfortunately, we just don't have anything, other than the most recent medications that's meaningful in terms of its effectiveness. And so I think it could be a distraction in many cases. We'll get to talk about a lot of those things individually as we progress, but the foundation is the same things I've been talking about for a decade or more, quite publicly on social media and with my books and ebooks. The foundation's the same: sleep, eat, and train, and stress control, connect, I guess you could say, and optimizing sleep and eating a healthy whole foods diet that's consistent with your energy demands, meaning calories, and then regular exercise, which would include some cardiovascular training and some resistance training. Those are and then I mentioned stress or connect. Those are the big rocks. Those are the things that still matter the most, that if you did those things, 98% of your results would come from those. And then everything else is kind of small, but becomes polarized. People start arguing over how much impact it has on your health. I'm sure you have a list of those things we'll talk about one at a time today.
Yeah, I think a good place for us to start within the context of that is that counting calories is overrated. You hear a lot of people, they're like, oh, it doesn't matter about the calories, it matters about the quality. Like counting calories is BS. But, the law of thermodynamics, So talk about like why calories in, calories out is still the gold standard for weight loss.
Yeah, I've always said that, move more, eat less is truthful, not useful. Yes, in fact, through dozens, if not over 100 trials, human randomized controlled trials now, we see that the energy balance equation is responsible for weight loss. And I've often said that, I talked about eat, sleep, exercise, or eat, sleep, train. All of that is affected by compliance. And I coined the term compliance is the science a number of years ago to say that losing weight, most people who go on a diet lose weight, but the vast majority of them gain it back just because they stop complying. And so that's the challenge. And so you said that, counting calories doesn't work. Both can be true. Counting or the energy balance equation can be true, and it is true. It has been proven multiple times, irrespective of your preferred path. Whether you choose, there's only three really paths that people can take. Peter Attia popularized this: CR, DR, and TR. Talked about this before, but there's only three ways. Obviously, there's multiple paths to the same destination, but there's really three. And all diets fall into one of these three categories: CR, DR, and TR. Calorie restriction. That's what we just discussed. That's counting calories. That's an effective method, a certainly reasonable method for people to lose weight. DR is dietary restriction. That's your keto folks, your vegan folks, your carnivore folks. It's eliminating a food group, right? Perfectly reasonable path for some people. We see some success. Everything has its pros and cons. Calorie counting can have its pros and cons. And then time restriction. Skip a meal, skip breakfast, do a 16-8, OMAD, alternate day fasting. All of that falls under time restriction. CR, DR, and TR. Calorie restriction, dietary restriction, time restriction. And the best diet's the one you'll follow. And what we see in the research is that people tend to be able to comply better or worse with different diets. It's very individualistic. And when you have trials on a particular type of restriction, whether it's calories, macros, or time, people respond differently. We call inter-individual variability. That a group of people, 100 people doing a time restriction diet, some will lose weight, some will gain weight. And you have to look at, on average, you could say that, here's your success rate, but we've got extremes. Some people lose a lot, some people gain a lot, some people lose a little, some people gain little. And so we don't have a real smoking gun as for what the best diet is. Calorie restriction is one option. It can work for some people, but you have to be able to comply with the diet. Most people who go on a diet lose weight, but the vast majority gain it back within 1 to 3 years, 50 to upwards of 90% by some statistics. And we do see in long-term trial, long-term dietary adherence over 2 years, is that on average, people are able to maintain about a 2% weight loss. Not impressive on any diet. And all diet practitioners, gurus, whatever you want to call them, whether they're professionals or they're just a popular influencer, have success stories. We all have success stories. The keto people have, thousands of success stories. The carnivore people have thousands of success stories. Vertical diet, I have thousands of success stories. We all have success stories. The long-term data shows, irrespective of diet, that none of us have any better long-term compliance statistics than the other. So it's all pretty equivalent in that regard. And so I want to be careful to say that, most of us get results in the short term, and all of us tend to have pretty poor long-term adherence. And that's just the human condition. And now that's influenced by our food environment, which has been has been the hot topic lately, including the testifying in front of the committee recently that a number of influencers testified at, Max Lugavere and the Food Babe and a host of other influencers testified recently. They were talking about the food environment. They made a number of claims, some of which are supported by the evidence and some of which simply aren't and won't lead to a resolution of our obesity crisis. So I'm happy to talk about those as we proceed as well, but it's a very, very hot topic right now.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, Max is a good friend of mine. I love his work. He's got a great podcast, but I didn't follow what was going on there intensely. So if you could talk about, because I think food environment is a big deal when it comes to people having access to certain foods and stuff. Within the context of that, like, what's true and what's not?
Yeah. Well, let's try and define what the food environment is. If put parentheses around food environment, that doesn't really have a dictionary definition. But what I'm referring to is the abundance of highly palatable, ultra-processed, calorie-dense foods. And you kind of got to say all three things together, because you can have a highly palatable food that's not very calorie dense, and you can have an ultra processed food that's not very calorie dense. It has to meet all three conditions in order to really have a significant impact on our weight, on our overconsumption. And so that's important. And I think most people would agree, including the PhDs in nutrition and the RDNs would agree that, and the research, I want to say it was Stu Phillips, I might be getting it wrong, had that study on the overeating study between whole foods and ultra-processed foods, highly palatable, ultra-processed, calorie-dense foods, just showing that those types of foods bypass our satiety signals, and we're apt to eat upwards of 500 more calories a day when we're eating hyperpalatable, ultra-processed, calorie-dense foods as opposed to whole foods. And I think that's a no-brainer. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I think even people who overeat understand that what they're eating isn't the best choice. And that could be influenced by a lot of things. Like you said, it could be influenced by economics. A lot of those foods are very cheap and affordable. I moved recently here to American Samoa, and I have an old video that I produced some 5 years ago talking about the obesity epidemic here, where I referred to hyperpalatable, ultra-processed foods, but I also referred to the fact that a lot of the folks here are on food stamps. The most affordable foods here are the kinds of foods that can be shipped here on a ship. So they have long shelf lives, and the three of those are going to be your white flour, your white sugar, and your seed oils. And that tends to be the most commonly consumed food, along with the fast food here on the island. So affordability could be an issue, but also people don't eat just for hunger. They may eat for joy, for celebration. They may eat for stress. They may eat for boredom. There's a whole host of reasons, trauma, reasons that people eat. and then having access to all of those very convenient, affordable, ultra-processed, hyper-palatable, calorie-dense foods, bypassing our satiety signals, we're over consuming calories. So again, we're back to calories in, calories out. We are over consuming calories. And a lot of the solutions that people offer, carnivore diet, vegan diet, keto diet, tends to eliminate hyperpalatable, ultra-processed, calorie-dense foods, because those are generally a combination of, and this is important to distinguish, because people say, well, it's sugar or it's fat, and it's not, it's both. It's a combination of sugar, fat, and salt that creates that hyperpalatability. Those foods are hard to put down. They're hard to eat and become satisfied and not be hungry again, very quickly. That's not just a sugar thing, and it's not just a fat thing. And people are in this war back and forth as to what's the best diet. And I think the answer there is the one you'll follow. And generally still the preferred method is to utilize strategies that we have to improve satiety, which is whole food, higher protein, higher fiber, and then a host of behaviors in terms of mindful eating a little slower, just being cautious to avoid that the times at which you might snack on those foods, and then having swaps, having replacement foods. That's one of the big things. So everybody at this conference, whatever you call it, this where they were meeting and talking about, all these influencers were talking about the obesity epidemic, I think general, or our health in general, which the primary driver of our poor health is our body weight. It is obesity. That definitely drives a whole host of, it increases cancer, it increases cardiovascular disease risk. The biggest thing is trying to get in front of that, or, even childhood obesity has increased a whole host of different diabetes, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure. All of those things are downstream of energy toxicity, resulting in NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which then results in pancreatic fat, and that ends up resulting in type 2 diabetes. It's precipitated by calories in the vast majority of cases, and it can be cured or at least managed by a reduction of calories. And we see is about a 7% weight loss can reverse type 2 diabetes, and a 15% weight loss can cure, meaning type 2 diabetes that's insulin dependent. For those people whose pancreatic insulin release hasn't been completely destroyed by the length of their exposure to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So there are some people whose pancreatic beta cells have died, are not fixable. So generally speaking, a lot of those people said a lot of the same things I just said, that we're suffering from greater amounts of obesity because of our overconsumption of these hyperpalatable processed foods. Unfortunately, and here's now where we start to get down into some of the details. And I talked about this. I talked about the food companies, what I said 5-6 years ago in my obesity rant, and how probably just like cigarettes, you'd have a hard time curing this problem without some sort of intervention. I lamented the fact that government intervention rarely works, and that the money that ultra-processed food companies have, that it would just turn into another boondoggle full of payola and corruption, and that you just wouldn't get the results that you want. And then people would switch from whatever high tax we put on one food and go to an alternate food. And I talked about the fact that, if you put taxes on soda, then somebody will just drink Kool-Aid. And if you tax calories in general, I talked about the fact that the fettuccine Alfredo at the Cheesecake Factory is 2,200 calories. What do you do to get that off the menu? Or do you? I'm just saying it's a slippery slope. Here's where I think a lot of claims are made that aren't supported by the literature. One, like you said, just sugar. As part of a healthy dietary pattern, you shouldn't overconsume added sugars. There's no question. But it's not the driver of obesity. We don't have the evidence that it's addicting. I know people make that claim, but in human trials, we just don't have the evidence that it's addicting. A lot of things increase dopamine, including hugs. As sugar as part of, as mentioned earlier, a pastry with sugar, fat, and salt, pretty hard to not overeat those. But sugar by itself, and we do have research showing that when you replace up to, I think it was 200 grams, almost 800 calories a day of sugar in when you control for calories and protein, you don't see an increase in obesity or weight gain in those populations. So we have lots of trials, and fructose is another one. High fructose corn syrup, trying to blame fructose. We have dozens of human trials now showing that there's no more propensity to increase when controlling for calories and protein. If you replace fructose or sucrose with fructose, you don't see any difference in blood sugar control or fat accumulation. And that's not to suggest that sugar is good for you or that you should eat too much, be eating too much sugar. It's just to say that eliminating sugar does not solve the obesity crisis, because it might not lead to, less consumption of calories. The other one that you mentioned earlier was seed oils. And I have a rant called "The Real Poison That's Killing Us." And I blasted seed oils because of what they're part of, because seed oils are commonly in a lot of these ultra processed foods, and they are empty calories that tend to drive overconsumption. Having said that, we don't have any human research to suggest that seed oils, when you're controlling for calories and protein, by themselves are inflammatory, which is commonly a claim, unless they're reheated oils and unless they're associated with massive overconsumption of calories, because any overconsumption of calories is going to lead to inflammation, regardless of the type of calorie, whether it's saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, sugar, or a combination thereof. When you have a huge meal, you increase there's some inflammation markers that increase. Because seed oils are associated with about 70% of the ultra processed, about 70% of the food we eat is ultra processed, and seed oils are commonly within that group of foods. If you eliminated seed oils, you would probably eliminate a lot of ultra processed foods. Same as I mentioned earlier, if you went keto, or if you went vegan, or if you went carnivore. Just by doing so, just eliminating seed oils, you would eliminate a lot of ultra processed foods and thereby probably not overconsume calories. But that doesn't necessarily say that seed oils by themselves are inflammatory or toxic or any of those things. And again, reheated oils are outside of that conversation, because we do see toxicity and inflammation from reheated oils. That's the deep fried stuff. And I spoke about that in my rant. So again, that's not a solution necessarily. That's not the cause of the problem. It's what these foods, it's what's in these foods altogether. The overall dietary pattern that might lead to overconsumption. But those are two that are commonly demonized, and I don't recommend consuming a lot of either. But we can't say that individually, and we have plenty of studies to show, we have studies that show if you reduce saturated fats and replace them with polyunsaturated fats, i.e. seed oils, you reduce cardiovascular disease risk. We have multiple studies showing that as well, simply because of LDL elevation from excess saturated fat consumption. And that's a whole other conversation unto itself, because that exists on a spectrum as well. How much saturated fat and for what, for what population. Not everybody has that problem. So you can see it starts to get murky. The waters start to get murky. Another common claim is that if we just all ate organic, and we just don't have any evidence to suggest that organic food is any healthier than conventionally grown foods, produce, vegetables, fruits. We just don't have any evidence to prove that. There are organic junk foods. You can have foods that are made organic that are still hyperpalatable, ultra-processed foods. Plus, that's a very expensive proposition. And now you've got people who can't afford. We already have a problem not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And then when you layer on top of that, the idea that you have to eat organic to be healthy, now you've further, I think, reduced the consumption of those foods, or intimidated moms with kids to think that, conventionally grown produce is bad for you, and it's not. And so those are some of the recommendations that have been made recently, and I don't think any of them solve the problem. I think you have to go after the actual foods that are being overconsumed, and how you go about that is, well, that's a question nobody's answered yet. And they're talking about regulation, taxation. I don't know where that's worked historically. Education seems to be a great place to start. That's what we did with cigarettes. We started not allowing them to market to kids, and then we started putting labels on them, cause cancer, etc. There are certain foods that increase obesity risk, and we should label those as such. And there are certain foods that shouldn't be advertised to kids. And we have to have somebody with I think the resolve to start to reduce sugar in cereals. We reduced salt in a lot of cases in some foods due to blood pressure problems, which was primarily driven by obesity, although 30% of the population's hypertensive as a result of some genetic precondition. But there are things that we can do, but we got to kind of be cautious that we actually solve problems and don't just create another money pit of bureaucracy.
You covered so much there. And I think like where I'd like to kind of follow up on is you talked about dietary patterns. And within the context of obesity is obviously like, you know, losing body fat and losing weight in order to be less obese and to get to a place where you're at a healthy body weight so you can reduce your risk of a lot of the diseases that you just mentioned that you mentioned a few minutes ago. I think one of the other myths that has been talked about over the years is you have to go like low carb in order to get like super super lean. And I know you've worked with and done the nutrition for some of the most like elite athletes that require their nutrition to be incredibly like dialed in for them to get to a certain body fat percentage for them to make weight or to win a competition or whatever the case may be. What is the actual evidence on the best diet to get lean?
I should say my co-author of the vertical diet is Dr. Damon McCune, who's a PhD, RDN, and was director of dietetics for UNLV. So he has a PhD in exercise physiology. He's a registered dietitian, and he was the former head of dietetics at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And we spent hundreds of hours together for the course of a couple of years, making sure that we had a lot of evidence to support the claims that we made in our book. We have thousands of dad bods and soccer moms too. Gen Pop is the majority of our business, helping people lose weight. But like you said, I competed in bodybuilding and powerlifting, so I've gained and lost, and this is conservative, well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career, bulking up to 300 pounds to powerlift and dieting down to single-digit body fat to compete in bodybuilding, back and forth and back and forth. And I've helped many, many athletes do the same on one spectrum or the other, whether it's a strongman or a power lifter or a football lineman, bulking to gain weight, or whether it's a bikini figure physique wellness competitor, male and female, all the way down to a 97-pound ballerina for the Sacramento Ballet Company. So I've worked with countless clients. Started competing in '88, and I was studying exercise science and working at a gym in college. It's the late '80s. And so this has been a life course for me. And there was things I used to believe and lessons I've learned throughout my career that have evolved. And so the question was, what's the best diet? And I said this in one of my first rants many, many years ago. The best diet, again, is the one you'll follow. That's different for everybody. Compliance is the science. And that's why I like to talk about the fact that there's many paths to the same destination. And the best diet is the one that's going to feel the least restrictive to you, the one that makes you the least hungry, that's easiest for you to become part of your lifestyle, something that you can do on a day in, day out basis, because ultimately it's not a temporary thing. There's no finish line. You have to find a healthy dietary pattern that you enjoy, that you can comply with, that you have the time to create and consume. And we have all sorts of methods to help people with time management. But that's the best diet. So I get frustrated when a keto practitioner, and this has happened many times over the years. I've had people come to me, I had one come to me crying because her doctor refused to help her if she wouldn't go keto. And I think you do people a disservice when you try and wedge them into some sort of your own personal bias, your own diet religion, without trying to find out what that individual likes. I send out a questionnaire, a very detailed questionnaire that lists many, many foods, and I have them rank the foods by their personal preference. I'm not going to give somebody a diet that includes foods they don't enjoy, but generally speaking, the best diet's the one you'll follow, and a healthy dietary pattern. And here's another thing that comes up oftentimes in social media, and that's the food pyramid. And people making these claims that the food pyramid is what really screwed us up, and that's when everybody got fat. The fact is, the food pyramid is quite a healthy recommendation, but nobody follows it. That's the problem. The food pyramid had never recommended people eat massive amounts of sugar and hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods. That's just what the food companies fed us. But it didn't comply. The food pyramid asked us to eat more fruits and vegetables. It did ask us to reduce saturated fats, but not fats overall. Things like healthy fatty fish, things like avocado, nuts and seeds. Those are all very fatty foods. Olive oil, those are certainly preferable fats. This, of course, gets us down into this argument about saturated fat and whether or not it causes an elevation in LDL and thereby increases cardiovascular disease. And we have plenty of evidence, randomized controlled trials, epidemiology, Mendelian randomization, multiple converging lines of evidence showing that there is a linear risk between increased LDL and increased cardiovascular disease. And overconsumption of saturated fats, not all saturated fats, but certain saturated fats, and the amount of those fats, it exists on a spectrum, can increase LDL and therefore increase your risk. It's one independent risk factor. It's not the only risk factor. And I think that's where people start to get a little sideways on when you talk about reducing saturated fats. Immediately they think, oh, don't take away my bacon and ribeyes or my butter. And yeah, I know. And all of those things can be part of a healthy dietary pattern, but you got to be careful how much you consume and what your individual risk is and your overall risk is. I mentioned there's more than just one. LDL is not the only risk factor. Obviously, insulin resistance, blood pressure, high iron, anything that damages the endothelial lining, generally inflammation. So that's, as far as the healthy dietary or as the food pyramid goes, the food pyramid's very solid recommendations, but people aren't following it. Increase your fruits and vegetables, eat a variety of lean proteins, fiber, nuts and seeds. So all of those things are perfectly healthy, diets for people, unless you have an allergy or an intolerance, say whey allergy, lactose intolerance. Some people are allergic to eggs, shellfish. There's a whole host of different things. Some people, their gut microbiome can't handle too much fiber. We saw that in the Stanford trials, the Sonnenberg trials at Stanford, where they fed fiber to groups and they kind of ended up in one of three categories. Either their microbiome improved, or it stayed the same, or they got worse. And so it really kind of depends on the individual and what their current gut health is. Antibiotics, of course, have led to a lot of people having compromised ability to manage fiber and digestion. We did see that 100% of the people that increased their fermented foods had an improved microbiome density and diversity. And that's things like Greek yogurt, sauerkraut, kefir, kimchi, things like that. Those are all fermented foods that tend to improve digestion. So there was a lot of talk about, and there has been, I think Nina Teicholz and Gary Taubes are the two that started writing about this whole food pyramid leading us in the wrong direction. It wasn't the food pyramid. It was that people didn't follow the food pyramid guidelines. It was the fact that people started eating substitutions that the food companies fed us. And I don't think the food companies are without blame here. I said that many years ago, but you got to be cautious what kind of remedies you suggest and whether or not those actually are going to improve the problems. You got to be cautious blaming things like the food pyramid because nobody's following the food pyramid. And the food pyramid's a perfectly reasonable recommendation, for most people.
Yeah. And I remember, I think Simon Hill, who we both know, told me about that same Sonnenberg study as well years ago. And he mentioned that the people who had a hard time digesting like fruits and vegetables and fiber or something, when they were fed like fermented foods, it improved their overall gut health. And I think a lot of people, they have gut issues, and especially if somebody is going from the standard American diet, which a lot of people do, and they're like, all right, I want to change my health. And then they all of a sudden like start eating like a bunch of fruits and vegetables. Their gut doesn't necessarily respond in the best way possible. The number of servings like people should include like in their diet per day of fermented foods to offset?
I don't know the fermented food servings. Like with dairy, they suggest 3 servings a day. And Stu Phillips talked about that improving, not only having an independent effect on improving BMI, but also performance. And so I'm a huge fan of the Greek yogurt for both those reasons, fermented food and the fact that
yeah, that's a power food. For sure.
I really do. I hate using the word superfood, but that would certainly be one of them if the category were to exist, and I wouldn't get criticized by the academics, but that would be one of them. Would be Greek yogurt, and another one would be fatty fish. It would be your salmon and smash mackerel and sardines and the like. For your omegas, you really only need two 4 to 5 ounce servings a week to satisfy your EPA DHA requirements. And there's a whole host of micronutrients in there. So those are some of the things I lead with in my diet. eggs. I talk about biotin and choline and all the vitamins associated with the egg yolk in particular. Yogurt, fatty fish. I, of course, love red meat, some red meat, lean red meats, particularly for women for iron, because active women in particular tend to suffer from anemia. And so I'm a big proponent of that. And then, if you're wanted to add some lentils and some tofu into that, if that was your preference, that's perfectly fine. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do this right. And that I think that the more you restrict people, maybe there's folks with allergies or IBS, some sort of digestive disorder that's improved by switching from the standard American diet onto a more restrictive diet. We do see some evidence of that with IBS, with the FODMAP diet, that some restriction does show us an improvement in initial symptoms, but the goal would be long-term to reintroduce. And I think in very intelligent people who have evolved in this industry as they've gotten exposed to registered dietitians and PhDs in nutrition, one in particular would be Dr. Peter Attia, who used to believe in the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity, suggesting that if you ate anything that raised your insulin, that you couldn't lose fat. In fact, now we have plenty of evidence to show that that's a downstream problem. I already took you through the pathway of the upstream problem, energy toxicity leading to NAFLD, leading to pancreatic fat, which then causes insulin resistance and diabetes. The order is that direction. It's energy toxicity. And that makes people afraid to eat, a piece of fruit because they think it's going to spike their blood sugars. We have the glucose goddess running around with her ridiculous statements about glucose spikes, which are perfectly normal physiological responses to food. It's chronic elevations, which, is from insulin resistance, which is caused by energy toxicity. It's not caused by sugar. The symptoms are aggravated by consuming sugar when you don't have sufficient insulin sensitivity. And a lot of the ways that you cure that is weight loss and weightlifting. Exercise in general, just my 10-minute walks that I talked about post-meal can ameliorate that postprandial glycemia. So there's lots of methods that you can use to kind of manage diabetes, but the only way to cure it is with the weight loss and increasing lean muscle mass. So we're back to calories, back to calorie deficit again. So we've gone full circle on this thing.
This episode is brought to you by Timeline Nutrition. Listen, my main goals for the remainder of the year revolve around health and vitality. After hearing about Timeline Nutrition from several of my friends in the health industry, I decided to give their flagship product, MitoPure, a try. MitoPure contains urolithin A, which is a powerful postbiotic that can be challenging to get from your diet. As you know, science has been a big focus on the podcast, so I was really impressed that Timeline has done 10 years of research to bring this product to market. I've been taking their berry powder for over a month now, and have already noticed a bit of a difference in the gym. Some of the long-term benefits I'm hoping to achieve from taking it include improved energy, muscle strength, and endurance, which are right in line with my goals. So I highly recommend you check out Timeline Nutrition, and they are now offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. So just go to timeline.com/Doug to get 10% off your first order of MitoPure. That's TIMELINE.com/Doug. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I saw a couple people in my they who had diabetes, and they were always testing, their insulin levels, and then they were always buying like the low carb foods, and they were eating essentially like whatever they wanted to outside of just the carbs. So I guess growing up, that's how I understood diabetes, was the insulin model, in that if you raise your blood sugar, that's bad for diabetics, and they shouldn't do that at all. And then obviously, as I've gotten older and I've gotten into the health and fitness space, I've learned that's not true. And I honestly didn't really fully understand the science behind it until I think I had Lane and Simon on at both the same time. We were talking about diabetes, and they both like agreed on the fact that like the science was like, yeah, like weight loss is the best cure for diabetes.
Let me be clear real quickly. Let me be clear, because you mentioned something that the audience might jump on. You said that if you have diabetes, that eating sugar will cause a problem. If you have diabetes, you should control your carbohydrate intake. If you don't have diabetes, normal glucose fluctuations, that's normal. And so you shouldn't be afraid that eating carbohydrates is going to give you diabetes. It's energy toxicity from overconsumption of food in general. Matter of fact, and Lane probably mentioned this because I've heard him say it before, and I've been aware of this literature for years, saturated fats will increase non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at over twice the rate of carbohydrates, of simple sugars. So they've taken groups of people side by side, and they fed one group a higher saturated fat diet, one group a higher sugar diet. and the saturated fat diet group had twice the rate of fatty liver accumulation than the sugar group. Again, you got to be careful when you define what direction this thing works. If you have diabetes, you should probably and definitely reduce your sugar intake, but you should do some other things too. And we're talking about type 2 diabetes. And the other things would be weight loss and increasing lean muscle mass. I've had type 1 diabetics as clients who wanted to improve their workouts. They wanted to consume more carbs so they could train longer and harder for more volume. And but they couldn't accumulate the carbs without taking more insulin. And taking more insulin is not a good thing for your health. And chronically consuming more and more insulin. So what we did is I had them break up their workouts post meal. I would have them eat their carbohydrates and then do a brief workout following their meal consumption. And they were able to they would do 3 short workouts a day. So if it was upper body day, they would do, back in the morning and biceps in the afternoon and chest at night or something like that. And it would just be a brief 20-minute lifting session. Now, I understand that's not terribly convenient for most people, but their goal was to build muscle and have better workouts, lift heavier and do more volume. So they were able to actually reduce their insulin intake by 50%. I have many testimonials, which is a good thing because taking more and more insulin over the years, insulin is one of the things that can cause endothelial damage, high insulin, hyperinsulinemia, and high blood pressure and other things. So it's just, even for a type 1 diabetic, they can eat carbs if they're stimulating their muscles post meal. And we do that with the walks for just general population as well.
Yeah. And so like one of the best things you can do to improve your overall health, reduce body weight, get leaner, etc., is to lift weights and to improve lean muscle mass. And I know one of your, I guess, quote unquote rants, you've said it a couple times on my show, is that like just going to the gym isn't the same. You know what I mean? Like, just because you go to the gym, it's not this, it doesn't mean you got a good workout in, right? Like battle ropes and burpees aren't the same as like lifting heavy. Talk about like some of the myths people may believe when it comes to exercise and what they should do instead.
Yeah. And I don't even want to say lifting heavy. It's just lifting with the appropriate amount of intensity.
You do have a shirt on that says strong right now. So
Indeed. That's my preference. And again, I said the best diet's the one you follow, but I also say the best exercise is the one you'll do. And I encourage everyone to find the exercise that they enjoy. More recently, as much as I hate to admit it, I've kind of taken on this bad habit, this little addiction called pickleball. And so my wife introduced it to me last year, and we lived in Las Vegas on Sunset Park, where they have 26 lighted courts that were going from morning 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. So I would hop over there and play challenge games. And then when we moved down here to the island, they have indoor pickleball. And there's a whole group of people that get together every day and play pickleball. So you'd be hard spent to find me doing any deliberate cardio. I've always kind of railed against that because most people I find don't enjoy it and they don't do it very consistently over the long term. And by that, I mean going to the gym and doing 40 minutes on a treadmill. I would rather stick a fork in my eyes. It's just so monotonous and boring. And it's not great for weight loss, to be honest with you. And that's another discussion. Exercise is great. Get your heart rate up, but find the kind of activity that you enjoy. The best exercise is the one you'll do. I tend to play a lot of pickleball, but I also take my 10-minute walks after meals, and I also lift weights. And so I'm getting at least 30, 40 minutes of walking a day, plus an hour of pickleball, plus my weightlifting, plus I go swimming. So I'm getting plenty of activity. I encourage everyone to get as much activity as they can. But if you artificially have someone, a trainer, assign you a workout, exercise, it's important to define it. And I call exercise battle ropes and burpees. That might not be something that you look forward to, that you're willing to do consistently as part of your lifestyle. It might just be something that you're going to battle through or do because you feel an obligation that it's going to get you to your goal. Training is a very different thing. Exercise is different than training. Training is measurable and progressible. And if you want to build muscle, and don't conflate the two, going to the gym and lifting weights with a lot of junk volume is not the same as building muscle. You have to have a sufficient stimulus. And you used the word heavy, and that's why I corrected you and said that it's actually the intensity. And you don't have to live heavy to get a sufficient stimulus to build muscle. Matter of fact, 85% of your 1 rep max for 5 reps, you can build just as muscle just as well doing 50% of your 1 rep max for 20 reps. Now that's lighter, right? but the intensity has to be the same, meaning you have to get within a rep or two of failure. If you do 20 reps and you could have done 30, probably not a sufficient stimulus. That's exercise, it's not training. You didn't sufficiently stimulate the muscle fibers. There wasn't enough mechanical tension to get your body to adapt and build muscle. And so the intensity is what matters most. Whatever rep range you choose, I tend to put most people in that 8 to 12 rep range simply because it seems to be a little lower fatigue. Maybe for older people, the heavier weights hurt them. They feel pain, or the lighter weights, you tend to accumulate a lot of fatigue with lighter weights for high reps as well. Plus, mentally speaking, for most people, it's not terribly enjoyable to go in there and try and do 25 reps of a set. And it might take longer than what, I have to be cautious to understand that weightlifting is not something a lot of people enjoy or is a priority in their life. And so I have to economize, I have to fit it within their schedule. And so I'm doing a lot of antagonistic supersets, meaning opposing muscle groups. So I'll do a chest exercise, rest a minute, do a back exercise. So I'll have them do a dumbbell press, rest a minute, lat pull down, then rest a minute, dumbbell press, rest a minute, lat pull down. Then I'll switch to like an incline press or a fly, and then rest a minute and do a long pulley row. So I'll superset, and we found in the literature that gives you equivalent results as doing each body part separately, so long as you get adequate rest that you can still, subsequent sets, you can still train hard, getting within a rep or two of failure and not having what we call a precipitous decline in volume. If you can do 10 dips on your first set and only 4 on your second set because you didn't rest long enough, that might not be a sufficient stimulus because there's certain energy systems that haven't regenerated sufficiently enough. Maybe your central nervous system's still a little tired. Maybe your creatine phosphate system isn't completely restored, so you burn out real quick, and you're just training something other than mechanical tension is the problem. Your cardiovascular system, you're just breathing too heavy and hard, and so all those things become a limiting factor, and your proximity to failure suffers on subsequent sets. So I do like to rest a little longer. We do see in the literature that 2-minute rest is better than a 1-minute rest for strength and for hypertrophy. And the only way I can get through workout faster with those longer rests is to alternate opposing muscle groups, antagonistic body parts. And so that's kind of one of the ways I assign that to the Gen Pop.
And so intensity matters most. And you mentioned junk volume. I don't want people to be confused and that they don't have to pay attention to volume, because I think volume does matter, especially like somebody as you're getting conditioned as a strength athlete. Like you have to, there's different ways obviously to increase intensity, whether it's more volume, more reps, more of an eccentric motion, more of an intense exercise, whatever the example is. But you're right. Some people just go into the gym and they just waste time, right? They waste, they go in and they'll do like bicep curls with a weight they could have done more reps with, or they do 10 reps with a weight. They do 10 reps where they should have used heavier weight or whatever the case may be. But talk about like how much volume, like the average person would need to continue to build muscle and maintain what they have.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that beginners will benefit from any kind of training, even junk volume. If you go in and do 10 curls and you could have done 20, you're still going to grow from the 10 because you're a beginner. You're just starting out. So my goal first and foremost is to get them to the gym and then to find exercises that they actually enjoy, because there is no best exercise. I used to think that a squat was better than a leg press. That was just one of those tough guy old powerlifting mentalities, and it doesn't even lend itself better to sport. I used to think that just because of the balance component, and sport is sport, and there's functional fitness is a really bad term where people go in and they try and benefit their sport by doing something similar to their sport under load, and that's never terribly effective. So that's another conversation, but just for people who want to build muscle, consistency over intensity, at least initially. Let's get to the gym regularly, find exercises that you enjoy and do them. And then over time, yes, as you get closer to failure, and you don't have to go completely to failure. And I just tell them to just go until the pace is such that all of a sudden the weight slows down as you lift it. So you're bench, and it takes you a little longer to finish the concentric portion of the bench. That's a sufficient stimulus. You can rack it. You don't have to do another one. You don't have to fail. And then over time, you should be able to progress. And what you said, you can progress by adding 5 pounds, or by adding 1 rep, or by adding 1 set. And here's where there's a lot of debate right now in the industry amongst the academics. I think everybody agrees that minimum effective volume to grow, to maintenance is very low. 4 sets a week you could maintain. But if you're looking to grow, then I'd say 10 to 20 sets per week per body part. And that would suggest that you train about twice a week or twice every 8 days. Like I kind of do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, or Monday's upper, Friday's lower, or I'm sorry, Monday's upper, Wednesday's lower, Friday's upper, Monday's lower. That allows you to stay on the same schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But it's an 8-day split, right? Or you could do a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. The split doesn't matter. It really doesn't. What matters is that split fits your schedule and you're most likely to adhere to that. So train on the days you likely think that you're going to be able to get to the gym, and then try and design a program where you train every body part twice a week. It could be full body every Monday and full body every Friday. That's sufficient. But as the number of sets increase, that workout's going to get longer. It's a little harder to maintain focus through, an hour and 15 minutes of, especially as your intensity increases, your duration will wane. You can train long or you can train hard, but you can't do both. So you got to be cautious. That's when people start breaking up body parts, upper, lower, so they can maintain their intensity and maybe get a little more volume in. That's the primary driver of that. But there's a big battle going on right now. There's a group of people that believe that volume, you continue to grow up to like 40 sets a week per body part. And then there's a group that suggests that those are beginners who most of it's neural adaptation, some of it's water retention or fluid or swelling, which is common when you try and measure too close to the last training session. There's kind of a debate going on right now amongst the academics themselves, and suggesting that intensity is more important. And once you kind of get north of about 6 sets in a given workout, say I go in to do chest. Once I get north of 6 sets, I'll probably see a significant decline in benefits from the 7th, 8th, and 9th set. Call it diminishing returns, right? I probably got most of the results from the first 5 or 6 sets, and in any additional set, I'm going to get less and less benefit, and might increase the fatigue to such a point that it would take me longer to recover or maybe not even super compensate before the next workout. Meaning I might recover, but I might not get the additional growth in strength or size that I'm desiring, because now I'm going to go back in and break it down again. I call that digging ditches instead of building mountains. And sometimes people will train so hard that really all they're doing in their off time is repairing what they damaged, and they're not super compensating or building up additional adaptive muscle tissue to prepare them for the next bout. So I think about 6 sets. That's kind of where and I think it's a little less than that. There's again a lot of conversation. I won't name the names on both sides because they're in a bit of a heated battle right now. I tend to like the lower volume now, particularly at my age, because fatigue is an issue, and I'm 57 and I don't recover as well as I used to. I still tend to try and lift in the 5-rep, 85% load range, because I like strength I like to get the dual benefit of strength and hypertrophy during the workout. So I'm in the 6-rep range, right in there, 5 to 8. And I'll do maybe 4 top sets in a workout. And that takes a while to warm up for, because those are pretty heavy sets. And I'll do, say, 2 sets of leg press and 2 sets of leg extensions. And then I might go do 1 adductor, 1 abductor, 2 sets of a knee hinge, a seated hamstring curl, 2 sets of a hip hinge, RDL, and then some calves. That would be a leg workout. But I'm doing 2 top sets of leg extensions, 2 top sets of leg press, 2 top sets of hamstring curl, 2 top sets of RDL. So those are the major exercises. I'm doing a total of 4 for quads and 4 for hamstrings. I have a significant, history of lifting, so I'm pretty comfortable that I can achieve a maximum amount of effort. But I think if I did any more, I'd have a hell of a time recovering. And I don't know that I would add anything in terms of size or strength, and probably might even see some regression due to the increased volume at my age. So 10 to 20 sets a week means 5 to 10 sets per body part per workout. If you're splitting your upper and lower, then you would do 5 sets of chest twice a week. And if you wanted to get up to 10 sets of chest twice a week, I would do that gradually. I wouldn't jump right in. I would start with the 5. And then you could progress it to 6 on week 2, progress it to 7 sets on week 3, 8 sets on week 4. Having said that, I think that the most important portion of the progression isn't necessarily the volume. I think it's the load. I think that you want to add at least 1 rep or 5 pounds. The added sets would be a secondary progression to me. I think the primary progression is 1 more rep or 5 more pounds where you can add it.
And I guess as a quick follow-up question to that, another big debate over the years has been, does being sore mean that you had a good workout? Like, what's your stance on that?
I'm glad you asked that, because we used to think that. I certainly used to think that, and I took pride in that. We thought that how sore we were.
The post-leg day walk was always the best, right?
Yeah. If you weren't limping, and if your hamstrings didn't lock up in the middle of the night, and if you could, go up a flight of stairs, traverse the flight up or down a flight of stairs, even worse, without holding onto the railing, all of those things. Here's what we now believe. We used to think that there were 3 components that drove hypertrophy. We thought one was mechanical tension. That's just the lifting of the weight, right? 2, we thought that muscular damage. That's what we just discussed, how much DOMs you have the day after training. And 3 was, what do they call that? Metabolic, was the pump, right? Was the pump. How much blood you pumped in there. What do we call that? Metabolic. Terrible. There's too many things going on in my head, but someone in the audience will certainly put it in the comments. Stress, metabolic stress. And that would be the pump. And we used to believe that there were 3 drivers. Now, what the most recent research suggests is that it's all mechanical tension, and that the other 2 are passengers. They're likely to happen if you get a sufficient workout. You're likely to get sore, and you're likely to get a pump if you get close enough to failure and you do enough and train with enough intensity to stimulate a response. But when you first go to the gym as a beginner, you're going to be very sore. But if you continue to go to the gym every other day or twice a week for the course of a few weeks, the same workout will make you less sore. Your body adapts and is able to perform those exercises. And some of it's neural adaptation. Your nervous system gets used to it. But we used to think that like muscular micro tears and stuff like that would dictate, was the precipitous to the growth and repair. And now we don't believe that. We believe that the mechanical tension is the driver. We believe that the other 2 are passengers, and that you shouldn't necessarily strive for soreness, but you just strive for a hard workout, and soreness will likely happen as a result. And you'll become less sore over time as you continue to repeat that same workout, but you should progress by adding 1 rep or 5 pounds to those sets. That's kind of how you know you're getting bigger, because if you get stronger, it's likely that you're getting bigger. They're correlated. It's not necessarily causal, but they're correlated. And if you're lifting the same weight to the same range of motion with the same form, or I should say, if you're lifting a heavier weight, after accounting for the newbie, after accounting for neural adaptation, because initially, at least, some of the improvement in strength is the result of just better coordination, practice at the movement, kind of like shooting a 3-pointer or a free throw. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. Your body learns to recruit and coordinate the effort, and so you become better at you just become better, more practiced at performing the movement. So you do increase the number of reps or weight that you use. But neural adaptation usually subsides, within 3 to 4 weeks, even for a beginner. Experienced lifters, probably within 2 weeks, they've already mastered any new movement, and everything subsequent to that. It's one of the strategies that we use with clients, and I call myself out here, but when a new client comes in, I don't want to do battle ropes and burpees. I want them to enjoy the process. I want to hook them on lifting weights. So I'll put them on a trap bar deadlift. It's one of my favorite one for new clients. And whatever they can lift, they lift. If they come back 3 days later, they will lift more. 100% of the time. When you bring them back 3 days later, they'll do 1 more rep or 5 more pounds or 2 more reps or 20 more pounds. And you'll have a record of what they did previously, and they'll be really excited about that. You're really starting to put the hook. And you and I both know that's just neural adaptation. They just got a little better, a little more practice at the movement. They exerted a little more effort. And the next time they come in, they'll lift another 10 pounds or 20 pounds or 1 more rep. And they'll be setting PRs every week or every workout for a month or 6 weeks straight. Big PRs. And that'll really hook them onto the weightlifting, particularly for strength, for sets of 5. And that's kind of how we design a lot of our programs for dad bods and soccer moms and Gen Pop, is we have them set a PR. It's not a single, it's not a squat necessarily. It could be a leg press, it could be a trap bar deadlift, it could be a lat pull down, any PR. We get them to try and beat a PR. and they see the progression over the course of the first 4 to 6 weeks. And by then they've created the habit. They consistently come in. They're setting goals. They enjoy the training. It's not, they don't have to leave out of there feeling like they're going to puke. And those are the methods that we use to try and get people to train consistently with weights.
Well, Stan, this has been awesome. I wanted to thank you again for coming back on the show and for your time. I think the audience can get a lot of value out of this.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.